Hello. So in this video, I wanted to start by telling two stories. The first is from when I was about 21 or 22, possibly 23. This took place in Sedona, Arizona, when I was about to climb a little outcropping called the Cathedral Rock. You could just think of it that I was basically trying to climb up a hillside. And the thing about this climb was that there was no singular trail. It was just a crisscrossing of somewhat arbitrary trails. I wasn't sure if anyone had actually made them or it was just the remnant of many, many, many people finding their way up this hillside, up this cathedral rock. And so as I was climbing up, about a quarter of the way up, I came upon a fork in the road. And one went left, one went right, and neither appeared more advantageous than the other. And I found myself a little stuck. And I thought, oh, this is similar to what happens in life sometimes. What do you do when you don't know which choice to make? And I had a thought at that moment that I'd never had in my life up until that point. It's not a particularly remarkable thought, but I remember the thought because it was the first time I'd ever had the thought. And the thought was, Yuichi, it probably doesn't matter which choice you make, which path you take, other than the only bad choice you can make is to stay stuck, being indecisive. And so I don't remember which one I chose, I just chose one of them and got to the top. And I imagine had I chose the other one, I would have gotten to the top also. There might have been a 1 to 10 minute difference in the route, which I don't think would have made a big difference either way. I don't think the scenery in one or the other was far superior to the other. The point, again, being that the worst thing I could have done was just being stuck. And I've carried that in my own life, that unless one choice appears significantly better or worse than the other, and both choices look pretty much the same, it probably doesn't matter which way I choose, and that the worst choice is the choice of staying stuck, of staying indecisive. So it's usually better just to choose one or the other, or make the choice of doing nothing, which is a little different from being indecisive. Doing nothing means I'm just going to drop the whole drama of choosing, and I'm just going to do nothing, at least in regards to whatever the choice may be, and focus on something else. So that's the first story. The second story I wanted to tell, I think happened more around this also happened in my early 20s. So my early 20s were marked by a lot of difficulties and dark periods. And I've been told, it had been suggested to me by numerous people that when you're in a dark place, it's hard to find your way out. So one of the best things that one can do is to pick up the phone and call somebody and see if talking to someone won't help you out of the quagmire or the difficulty that you find yourself in. So I would end up in a dark place or something, and I would remember that bit of advice. And then I would mentally think through all the people I could call, and one by one eliminate them. I would think, this guy's kind of judgmental, this guy is just full of BS, and so on and so forth. And before I knew it, I basically had no one that I could call. And I would end up not only feeling bad and lost, but I would feel doubly bad because I knew that I wasn't doing something that could have been helping me. And I did this many, many times across possibly a year or two. It's not something that would happen weekly, but it would happen frequently enough. And the funny thing about these dark episodes is that when you're not in them, you oftentimes don't think about them unless you have some kind of practice to do that. And back then, I didn't have a practice to consciously reflect on these periods. But I remember after a year or two of this, I was around a mentor of mine named John. And I remembered that I would fall into these spells, and then the subsequent hole of not being able to call anyone and feeling worse. And so I remembered, and I said to John, and I wanted to share this dilemma with him because I thought that he perhaps knew some secret ingredient that would give me the courage or willingness to pick up the phone and call somebody or something, or he would make me feel better about myself for failing to call, whatever. So I turned to John and I said, John, what do you do when it feels as if there's no one that you can turn to? And without missing a beat, he said, you turn within, Yuichi. It was interesting because I had never considered that as an option, because I was so locked into the idea based on numerous suggestions to reach out, that I was so locked into that as my only option that until John said, you turn within, I just didn't know. And so after that conversation, I would still continue to get into a dark place, but I would remember his suggestion. And so I would just start meditating. And in a lot of ways, that one conversation became one of my main supports for a meditation practice that's, since then become a daily, robust and daily meditation practice. It's not the only support, but it's one of the turning points that supported that. That this impulse to turn inward was a strong impulse that I had, and I believe to this day that it was there. And the suggestion to turn outward was the exact opposite or contrary to what was more natural for me at the time, and to this day, what's more natural. But the larger point of that story is that I began to apply in my life was that when I think that there's something that I ought to do, but I'm not willing, I'm wasting my time by being stuck in that battle, in inner conflict of, I should do this, but I don't want to do it. It's being at that fork in the road, looking up at Cathedral Rock. That's the worst thing that I can do. Instead, I can ask myself a simple question, which is there anything else that I'm willing to do that could be positive or productive or helpful in that moment? So for example, there could be times when I'm kind of in a place where I'm thinking I should probably meditate, or I should probably read some kind of book that will be helpful to me. But I don't want to. I'm not willing. So if I'm not willing, when I was younger, I would have forced myself, or I don't know, beaten up on myself, or just then gotten so frustrated with myself that I would have just taken a nap or something. But whenever I remember, and since then, instead of engaging in that inner conflict or standing in that place of indecisiveness and non-action, I simply ask myself, is there anything else I'm willing to do? And it could be that the only thing I'm willing to do is I'm willing to go for a walk. So let's say I go for a walk. As I go for a walk, I start feeling better. I come home, I'm hungry, so I cook myself a really nice meal, and I feel really good about myself, and I feel settled. And in that settledness, I find myself naturally walking to my cushion and taking a seat and engaging in meditation. And so oftentimes I'll end up at the exact act that I was resisting. But rather than forcing myself into it, or cajoling myself or manipulating myself, I simply ask myself, what else am I willing to do? And I go with that, and I leave behind the thing that I'm thinking that I should do, and I go with the whatever else. And oftentimes I'm led back to it. And there's a kind of a flow to that. And so I characterize the former way of looking at it as being stuck and indecisive. I characterize the latter way as going with the flow of things, living in the flow of things. And the indicator of that flow is always my willingness. It's the willingness to act. If there's no willingness, there's simply no willingness. Why be in a battle with oneself? Why not simply go where one is willing, trusting that one will eventually arrive back at the thing that one thinks one ought to do. And if one's not going to do it, then it doesn't get done, and that's also not that big of a deal. So linking, of course, I'm hoping that you're seeing the link to procrastination, that the benefit of seeing that situation, that inner conflict that we call procrastination, as simply an incorrect allegiance to the person that's wanting to get things done right now, which is an allegiance to person A from part 1, and changing our allegiance to person B, the person who doesn't want to do it, and saying, oh, hey, you're showing me, we say to ourselves, you're showing me that you're not willing or interested in doing this right now, so we won't do it. And we drop it. And when we drop it, we can just ask ourselves, what are we willing to do instead? So maybe instead of working on our taxes, what we're willing to do is to go work out. So we go work out. Or maybe what we're willing to do is talk to a friend. So we talk to a friend. And we fill our day with that. We go with the flow. And maybe a week later, one day we sit down and we just find ourselves doing the taxes. We didn't have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. We didn't have to use sheer will, sheer exertion of will to get to the task that we originally thought. We just somehow find ourselves doing it. It seems to be happening of itself, even though, of course, we're engaged with it. And where does all that come from? It begins from accepting that we're not willing to do it. It begins from dissolving this construct, this notion of procrastination, and reframing it as there's simply no willingness to engage in the act right now, so why don't I drop it and engage in something else that I'm willing to do? And the whole thing opens up. And that's a different kind of way of living, isn't it? It's a way of living, as I mentioned, in the flow of things. And living in the flow of things isn't some passive thing of just like laying around on the couch all day and being lazy. It's about intelligently maneuvering in our lives. But when we say intelligently, intelligent to our own selves, intelligent to who we show ourselves to be. And so this will wrap up my comments on getting over or dismantling procrastination. In other words, dismantling the concept of procrastination. We get over procrastination not by forcing ourselves to do the thing we're not willing to do, but we get over it by believing who we show ourselves to be in our actions and choices. And if that choice is to not do it, then we believe that. And we trust that that's what's best. That's who we are in that moment. And there's a kind of a peace. And with that peace, we can live this life from a place more of peace instead of deep inner conflict and self-condemnation that many who claim to suffer from procrastination often live in, with a sense of self-condemnation, self-judgment, being overly self-critical. So I hope that's been of interest, and I'll stop this video now.